First of all, it is very concerning because we see that Hezbollah and Hamas work with the same strategy based on the same principle of deeply embedded in the civilian society and abusing civilian facilities for terror purposes and using eventually the civilians as human shields. And as we see, the IDF does the utmost efforts in order to minimize the collateral damage. And this is the reason that the IDF warns in advance the people to leave the places that we are going to bombard. Now, the IDF is concentrating actually, I would say, on two major things. The first thing is cleaning the South Strip between the recognized international border in the south and the Litani River in the north from all the terror compounds of Hezbollah that were prepared for a long period of time in order to launch an attack, a very wide and deep attack on the northern part of the state of Israel. And the second thing that the IDF is concentrating on is the strategic weapon of Hezbollah, which is mainly the mid and the long range accurate missiles that they have. And the bombarding of yesterday is the bombarding of a factory that they used in order to manufacture their strategic missiles, their accurate weapon. And what we see is that the Air Force, the Israeli Air Force, is concentrating on these facilities, be it in Beirut or in the Bekaa, in Baalbek area, along the border with Syria. In these distant places or areas, Hezbollah concentrated its efforts in order to build its strategic capacities, and we are doing now the efforts in order to destroy them. But as we see, they still have dozens of thousands of rockets, which are, I would say, not accurate rockets, but for short and medium range that reach until Haifa area, and they are concentrating in exercising a sort of an attrition war, trying to force more than 1 million people to remain all the time near the shelters and actually to paralyze the routine of life. And this is something that we actually try to deal with mainly by our defense, aerial defense systems, Iron Dome mainly. And we have a very high percentage of success by intercepting these rockets, but we are talking about an average of 200 rockets per day. So even if we have a very high percentage of success, let's say something around 95%, you are still with something like 5% of failure or failing to intercept, and these are the rockets that eventually fell on buildings. But the Israeli citizens are very disciplined, and they follow all the instructions of the Home Front Command. And we have almost in each house or apartment in Israel, we have a shelter, something which is abnormal by itself, okay? So people are going to the shelters, and this is the reason that we have very few casualties. The Americans are still hesitating to increase their pressure on Qatar, demanding Qatar to increase its pressure on Hamas, mainly on the leaders of Hamas who are located in Qatar, and now they became to be more significant after the killing of Yahya Sinwar. And the second reason is the killing of Yahya Sinwar and the absence of any recognized leadership in the Gaza Strip of Hamas. And even if there will be such, let's say, for an example, Muhammad Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar's brother, I'm not sure that he will be able to impose his will on the other factions. And we have to remember that Hamas has never holded all the hostages. We are talking about now 101 hostages alive and unfortunately dead. But not all the 101 are held by Hamas. We know that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad holds some of the hostages, and we know that some other marginal factions, like the Popular Front, maybe holds some, and there are also um, crime mafia families that hold the hostages. Now, the difference between Yahya Sinwar and Muhammad Sinwar is that Yahya Sinwar was recognized as a sort of a national symbol, okay? And due to his responsibility for planning the October 7th attack, and due to his position as the head of Hamas the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and his history and reputation, he was very well respected by all the factions and all the families, and therefore he was able to negotiate behalf of everybody and to impose his will on all the other factions. I'm not sure that this is the situation today, and therefore I think that the only option to increase the probability for releasing the hostages and to reach to the end of the war in Gaza is by doing two things in parallel. The first one is to increase the American pressure on the Qatarians, and the second one is to increase the military pressure on Hamas. This is exactly what we are doing in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And actually, we are paralyzing, we are collapsing the last substantial center of gravity that Hamas still has in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Once it will be totally collapsed, I think that we can say that the war is ended. And maybe by ending the war after collapsing the last center of gravity of Hamas, we will be able to create more operational and intelligence opportunities that will enable us to release by the IDF more hostages, or to pressure the remained, I would say, leaders of Hamas in the Gaza Strip to be more flexible and to make some further concessions with regard to the hostages. And Israel will enable them to leave safely the Gaza Strip with all the remained, I would say, operatives of Hamas. This is the only option that I see. Unfortunately, I don't see any probability or I would say a high probability for any sort of negotiation with Hamas in the Gaza Strip under the current circumstances. Blinken tries, behalf of the American administration, to pursued Israel to minimize as much as possible its retaliation in Iran, because the American administration is still very reluctant with regard to the expansion of the regional war, and mainly reluctant with regard to any direct friction with the Iranians. And they understand that if the Iranians will retaliate aggressively on the Israeli retaliation, then Israel will be forced to be more aggressive in its retaliation. And it means, in their anticipation or in their assessment, that the Iranians will be fully involved in the expanded regional war, and then the Americans will have to be with boots on the ground, or their involvement will be much more substantial. And they are very reluctant in this regard. They don't want it. They are afraid that it will impact immediately the oil prices. They are 2 weeks before the elections. They are not in such a good situation with regard to the American constituency electorate. And therefore, they are trying to make their utmost efforts in order to prevent Israel from being too aggressive with its retaliation.